Well, in this um, part of our class, I want to talk to you a little bit about the New Testament as a book. We're people of the book. The Bible is the most enduring and prolifically published book in history. And so, what makes it so unique and how does it shape us? Every book begins before they have pages and words on the pages, and the pages are bound together and then they're put between covers. The books had a beginning before there was anything physical, and that's true of the latest James Patterson novel as much as it is of the Old and then the New Testaments. However, a James Patterson novel likely has a short journey from his research, his personal notes, his imagination to a document on his computer. And from there, it's an other short process of editing, though editing never seems short, printing and binding to make it into a book. The biblical texts follow much the same pattern to become a book. They began with historical events, with memories of those events, with discussion of the importance and the meaning of those events. And some of those memories and interpretive thoughts came from authoritative leaders in the community, apostles, associates of the apostles, other people who were considered authoritative. They were inspired by God through the Holy Spirit then to record what happened and explain the significance of what they wrote. They wrote in multiple genres. There was some history and poetry, apocalyptic visions, letters, sermons, and I could probably go on and on there. Now, the New Testament's journey from oral tradition to written form, which could be bound as a book, was actually very rapid. Um, not as rapid as a James Patterson novel, but it was remarkably fast. Paul was writing letters that make up portions of the New Testament within 20 years of the resurrection. And the final pieces of the New Testament were complete about 75 years after the resurrection, within the lifetime of the first generation of people who experienced Jesus. The Gospels were written by influential disciples. Some of them were apostles who wrote four theological biographies. Not all of those were apostles. Uh, Luke also wrote a companion volume, Acts, that explains the birth of the church and the events of the first few decades of the church. Now, all of these were written in through handwriting. They weren't typed and printed, so someone actually sat down and wrote every letter. And they copied them multiple times through handwriting, and those were carried throughout the Roman Empire to various groups of Jesus followers. The numbers of copies of the New Testament writings exceeded any other writings of the ancient world, and the copies that survive today far exceed the numbers of manuscripts of any other ancient writing. Um, the apostles and others who knew Jesus uh, began to die off. And this made it clear that the church needed an authoritative collection of writings that they could look to. And over the years, there were various authoritative collections that were gathered and listed by leaders in the church. This was the beginning of our New Testament canon. Uh, there were also lists of authoritative books, along with ones that were gathered into a volume and bound together in one book. Now, a book with pages that is bound is a codex. This was not a very frequently used form for recording and storing writing at the time. Scrolls were more common, although there were books, the way we think of books, the codexes. Um, but, it's impossible to bind a book the length of the New Testament in one usable scroll. There are Old Testament books that we have that are first and second, not because they were written separately, but because they were too long to be bound in one scroll. And so you had scroll one and scroll two. And so the New Testament is far longer than those. And so, how could you make a collection of writings? Well, you wouldn't use a scroll, you would use the bound codex. And so, this was moved into cultural prominence by the church as it sought to define what writings of the New Testament were authoritative for faith and practice. Handwritten manuscripts cannot be reliably identical like books that are printed from the same plates or digital documents. But even in modern printing, an error is easy to introduce to a text, and they appear in nearly every book that we read. They appear in the documents that I upload to you. I just noticed one as I was doing this little video. But handwritten documents necessarily contain errors and deviations from the original. And the field of textual criticism seeks to nail down the most reliable version of the content and wording of our New Testament canon. And of course, this is done with other ancient manuscripts. The work of New Testament textual critics at this point lets us know that our modern New Testament is accurate when we compare it if we were able to compare it with what was originally written and distributed. The early Christians were careful about their heritage and their writings, much like the Jewish people they sprang from. Also, the church grew and spread throughout the Mediterranean world very rapidly, which led to many copies of New Testament writings. And so, because of this, we have an unprecedented number of manuscripts, thousands of them from the New Testament, from as early as the second century. The early church theologians also quoted prolifically from the New Testament and the Old, but especially the New. And from these manuscripts and other sources, we know that the Greek text we have is reliable. Now, there are variant readings of the New Testament. About 12% of the New Testament has variant readings, and that may seem like a really high number, but most of those aren't significant at all, and no thought's needed to know the intended wording or lettering or something like that. 1.5% of the New Testament has significant variance. Typically, they're misspellings or someone who's copying accidentally repeats a word or a line, things like that. And again, those are relatively easy to determine which ones are accurate, what the accurate reading would be, as opposed to an inaccurate reading. My computer is constantly telling me that I have two these, like I stutter when I type or something like that. And those are easy to do. But just reading it, that that's what it's supposed to be. In these notes that I am talking from today that are linked above, if I haven't fixed it by the time you read it, there's an E missing off of the word the, and I just dropped it. But you'll know TH and go on, you'll know it's a the. There's no thought that's really needed to put into something like that. Um, there are a few that provide difficulty in determining exact wording, but even fewer of those have any real effect on the meaning of the New Testament text or any important teachings of the church. So we can be confident that the New Testament we're reading would be recognized by the first Christians as faithful. And I would invite you, if this is an area that you're very interested in, and to pick up some stuff on textual criticism. It's fascinating. Um, Let me give you one example of a variant reading. This comes from First John chapter 1, verse 4. And some ancient manuscripts read, "And we write these things to you in order that your joy might be full." And it also, in some manuscripts, "And we write these things to you in order that our joy might be full." And so, uh, it sounds more spiritual, more Christian, perhaps, to say we're writing these things for your joy. But some manuscripts say we're writing it for our joy. So, which one is likely to be the accurate one? We don't know for sure, but we're pretty sure. And the best manuscripts, the ones that have the fewest errors, the old and things like that, and are most full, the best manuscripts point us to the reading, and we write these things to you in order that our joy might be full, which might be surprising. It's later manuscripts that sometimes read in order that your joy might be full. So our best manuscripts point us to our. And like I said earlier, your joy seems more natural. It's unlikely that scribes would mistakenly change your joy to our joy and go to the less natural reading. Our joy is the more difficult reading, and so you usually don't see an error that moves from more difficult or from less difficult to more difficult. Also, the Gospel of John, which they would have been familiar with, speaks of your joy, which might move scribes and readers use the word your. It's very likely that our is because it's the more awkward reading and because it's the one in the best manuscripts that our is the correct reading. And there are things we can teach from that, although you wouldn't want to build a doctrine off of it. It's a variant reading after all. But when you look at it, it has no significant theological effect on our understanding of the New Testament. It's the reason why they're writing the theological stuff. And so there is a variant. And so it's not something that should cause us to stay awake at night or anything like that. Now, another way we could look at the New Testament is maybe not as one book, but as a library of books. Um, the themes of the New Testament are united. There's a lot of unity in the New Testament, but it's a unity within diversity. There are multiple authors of the New Testament. There are at least eight people who wrote the New Testament, and they work in various genres. There are the Gospels, which are theological biographies. There's Acts, which is a theological history, a narrative. There are the letters of Paul and Peter and those. There's the Apocalypse of John and Revelation, and there's poetry within some of them and all kinds of other things going on. And so you have different authors, at least eight, working in different genres, and they make the New Testament a book that is a library centered around one theme. It's a book library, but it is centered around one theme. It's much like you might go into a specialty library in oncology or something like that, and everything would be centered around that one thing. Everything here is centered around Jesus and our life in God's kingdom with Jesus. And so this is the New Testament as a book. I would invite you to go on over to the discussion board, and I have some questions for you over there.